Hi, guys. Welcome to the MHP podcast. This is episode 2, and today we'll be covering the issues of training like a bodybuilder, why it's important to train in extremes, and the problems of instability training. If this is the first time you're watching this episode, hi, guys. My name is Sarah Bruno. I'm a third-year McMaster student, and I'm here with Jacob.
Yeah, excited to dive into the topics today.
So before we start this episode, we're currently filming this at 5:37 p.m. on Super Bowl Sunday. And I'm kind of curious to know what your thoughts are on the Super Bowl because you are a huge football fan, but I guess the other side of football. Are you cheering for anybody? Are you even going to be watching?
I have to say I've been completely indoctrinated to the point that I have to myself say American football to know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Um, no, I can't say I've ever tuned into the Super Bowl. Can't say I will be tonight. Not a sport I've really got too much into. I tend to be very invested in the teams and the sports that I'm working with
hmm
rather than kind of being involved with sports from a fan perspective. So
hmm
yeah, I'm more of a basketball European football guy.
There we go. So you've never seen a Super Bowl?
Not a full Super Bowl. No.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll be watching, so I guess I'll let you know how it goes.
Who are you
All right.
cheering for?
So I'm cheering for the Chiefs,
Okay.
because of Travis Kelce. You know what that is? Yeah, Taylor Swift's boyfriend.
Yes, I'm aware.
All of my roommates have been watching football. Some of them have like boyfriends that play football, that type of stuff. So I took it into my own matters this year to unfortunately bet not that much
Mm.
money, like only $5, and to cheer for Travis Kelce because I'm a Swiftie. So, and she's gonna be there, so it's a plus.
As all the athletes I work with know, I make fun of everyone that does sports betting. So welcome to
Yeah,
the group.
yeah, I know. I deserve it, honestly. I got forced, but I only put $5 in total, so
Fair
it's
enough.
really rookie. And I decided to bet on which Gatorade is going to be poured on the coach. So it's
That's a good
it's
one.
not even, yeah, exactly. All right, so let's get into today's episode. For the first question, so I know that last episode, we were talking about bodybuilding and how it's very different from strength and conditioning, and also how it's super trendy. So, a lot of people are hopping on it, they're seeing it on TikTok, on Instagram, and they're just deciding to put it into their own routine without much knowledge. What are the risks of this, especially for an athlete who plays varsity level, and B, an athlete that maybe is coming back into the gym or just training in general?
Yeah, I think it kind of relates to some things we talked about last week about just asking more questions about your training process. And the bottom line is most of the training advice you see on the internet is going to be inspired by bodybuilding because that's like the most common kind of training bucket that most people fit in and where a lot of the content's coming from. So when you see someone say, "Oh, this is a great exercise," or whatever the content is, you have to ask yourself
Mm-hmm.
like a great exercise for what, or a great way to train for what. And with the bodybuilding world, it's very simple. You have one goal, put on as much muscle as possible, maximize hypertrophy. And as an athlete, yes, there's going to be times where you're going to put some focus on the hypertrophy realm if you're working to build up some tissue resiliency or like in the off season, just building a general preparation phase.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but overall, you're also caring about strength and rate of force development, elasticity, and there's all these other things that are important. So taking that bodybuilding inspired advice can lead you astray very often. So yeah, just keep asking that question of like, what is this training for and how's it going to help me?
Yeah. And, relating this especially to frequency, um, why is frequency important when it comes to how many times you're doing your workouts per week and what exercises you're doing? And how can athletes even plan their workouts properly?
Yeah, I think that's one of the downsides when you look at the traditional like bro split of, you might do a muscle group once or twice a week. And um, if you think about your sport, like if you're practicing your sport 5 to 7 days a week, I mean, you're using your legs
Mm-hmm.
7 days. Like some of these training schedules start to not make any sense. And it's also just looking at things through the wrong lens. So when it comes to building out the plan, I'll give you the example of how we run things at the professional level, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is honestly how I recommend people plan things for, whatever level you're playing at, because it just makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
Is the way things are typically run is everything's in relation to where the game is. So the day
Mm-hmm.
after the game, it's a low intensity session. If it's not just a full rest day, um, it's a great day for some isometrics, some things that aren't very taxing but can help regenerate tissue. And then going into 2 days after the game, that's where you're looking to kind of get the system up going again. So it's usually like a lower dose of speed and power and things like that to just
Mm-hmm.
stimulate the nervous system, not cause a whole lot of stress, but get some quality reps, and start to kind of potentiate yourself for the days to come. The
Mm-hmm.
middle of the week, which is now you're looking at if this is like a one game a week kind of schedule,
Mm-hmm.
4 days out, is going to be your strength session. So typically, if practices are planned out in an intelligent way, often you'll see practice matches kind of what you're doing off the court or off the field.
Mm-hmm.
But this is going to be your high intensity day. So it's not a super long session, but it's all your really heavy, really explosive things, um, long rest periods, things like that. Going into
Mm-hmm.
the 3 days out, this is your opportunity for the high volume stuff. So um, things that are longer in duration, a little more cardiovascular in nature, um, or higher repetition in the gym, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to 2 days out is speed and power focused. So it's not meant to be exhausting. You're not throwing heavy weights around. It's either like plyometrics or light strength exercises where you're moving the weight
Mm-hmm.
really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then the day before the game can look a lot like 2 days after the game, where it's just kind of like a low dose of those fast, explosive things to just keep you sharp, stimulate the nervous system, so
Mm-hmm.
that, excuse me, so that going into that game, you're not fatigued,
Mm-hmm.
and you're ready to go. So what you see is the intensities and volumes kind of rise towards the middle of the week and then fall.
Mm-hmm.
So you're fresh. But what you also see is, which I think we're going to touch on a little bit later, is the volumes and the intensities alternate. You have a high
Mm-hmm.
intensity day and a high volume
Yeah.
day, and it flip-flops.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll go deeper in that a little bit later.
Mm-hmm. So I like that you brought up neural stimulation because I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, bodybuilding gives you zero neural stimulation. Um, or would you disagree with me?
Hmm, a little bit, but it's definitely not going to contribute to any speed, power,
Mm-hmm.
elasticity goals that you probably have. So
Mm-hmm.
it misses
Mm-hmm.
that bucket completely.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know sometimes a lot of people say that the benefit of doing push-pull legs is the fact that you'll be able to have rest in between. But would you say that maybe having that much rest is actually going to negatively contribute to just the growth and efficiency of the muscle? Or because the goal is hypertrophy, that is a correct rest period between every single workout?
Well, I'll put it this way, is
Mm-hmm.
the way you need to recover from a high intensity session, like something that's very strength focused or
Mm-hmm.
very speed and plyometric focused, is different from the way you have to recover from a high volume session.
Mm-hmm.
That's
It's a good point.
why alternating between them, you end up being able to hit every day at a really high quality
Right.
without a lot of fatigue that carries through because you're not thrashing yourself 2 days in a row with the same kind of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then it doesn't even matter. You're gonna train your legs on every single one of those days to some extent. It's just the type of stress that you're giving yourself is the thing that matters.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, especially because um, I think, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, rest is equally as important
Mm,
to what you're putting into the gym, because then we also go into the whole topic of overtraining, overloading, and especially what that can do to an athlete. Um, Very closely related to this topic, training extremes, and I feel like this is kind of a topic that's not really discussed enough. Um, so let's just start out with the basics. What is the concept of training extremes, and what does it actually mean for an athlete's training process?
yeah, so in a sense, it's sort of what we broke down where you're trying to you're trying to take the high intensity actions and
Hmm.
separate them from the high volume, high repetition kind of actions. The perfect example of doing a really bad job of this is CrossFit because they'll take
Ooh.
uh, something like an Olympic lift that's a very intense, very technical action, and they'll do it for reps to make it cardio. And that's the absolute polar opposite of what I'm trying to convey with this stuff, where
Yeah.
you want to do the stuff that requires um, technique or speed and strength, and you want to put it on its own day. Keep a
Hmm.
lot of rest between efforts so that
Hmm.
everything's done at a really high quality, a really high effort. And basically, on those days, fatigue is the enemy of all of it. If you're ever like hands on your knees, panting, like I don't even, to be honest with you, like if you see a lot of sweat on a high intensity day, it's like that's probably not a good sign either. Um,
Mm. That's interesting.
but and then on your high volume days, that's your chance to go like conditioning, um, higher rep. If you have some hypertrophy
Hmm.
goals or there's a reason for that thing, you throw your high rep, 10 to 20 repetition of whatever it might be doing can fall on that day and you can push the duration of things.
Hmm.
And then that might be a more traditionally exhausting day.
Hmm.
Um, but just keep those things far apart from each other. And then if you
Hmm.
like I was saying earlier, if you alternate them, you go back and forth, um, you don't really get a lot of conflicting fatigue. And to be honest with you, the worst thing that happens
Hmm.
is you mix them together, and then what it does, based off what I was explaining, how you're able to alternate between them without a lot of worry with
Right.
carryover fatigue and things like that. If you have a day where you've mixed them both together, you have a high volume, high intensity day, it means the next day you're not really ready to do anything.
Yeah, you're still
And
recovering.
and the perfect example of that is like mo a game day is going to be a mix of both. Like you can't really avoid it. Like
Hmm.
it's going to wreck the system. You're going to be fatigued, and the day after is just not a good day to train.
Yeah.
In most cases. So that's why you take the rest the day after the game. Then you get into your alternating back and forth.
Hmm.
And then you get ready for the next one. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it is all about kind of controlling when you can train in extremes because yeah, as you said, like in game day, there's absolutely no way that you can really lower or decrease the level of extreme that we're touching on. But
nor should you try because game day is the day where you
yeah,
just lay it all out there and you go get your win. So
yeah, yeah, exactly. There's different things that come into play, especially even just the mental part, because you're not only physically tired, but you're also mentally tired. Um,
mm,
but I was wondering, training extremes, how does that specifically relate to conditioning sessions? Because I know that people and coaches will pick different conditioning exercises. Some people will choose sprints, some other people will choose the bike. Um, what are the benefits of training conditioning um, during a specific day of the week? When would you personally do it or place it for your athletes? Let's say if if you play a game on Sunday.
yeah, so I think I come from an environment where conditioning is practice, and that's like almost never been a need to supplement.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Conditioning
soccer, exactly.
Conditioning is an off-season thing. You
Mm-hmm.
condition to be ready to practice in preseason, and then the preseason prepares you for the season, and so on. And I think if you have a coaching staff that is able to plan things really intelligently, the point of practice is to make sure you're fit. And I think soccer is definitely a sport that does it better than a lot of other sports. I think I've seen a gap like coming from basketball and going into soccer. I was like, oh, this is actually just done at a higher level. Um, where I think there's still this big mentality where it's like, okay, basketball practice is for, you know, skill development, and then you got to run your suicides after to get fit. And it's like, well, why not just play at a high intensity and you'll get the most specific kind of fitness possible
Hmm.
from that. But to circle back around to the question, um, if additional conditioning was needed, whether, I mean, I know like certain rep teams, like maybe you're not even practicing every day throughout the week. Like there's a
Hmm.
bunch of different scenarios you could be in um, where added conditioning could be necessary. And you would just follow the same kind of high-low volume intensity kind of alternating schedule.
Hmm.
Um, Anything that is done at a high, like it sounds simple, but anything that's done at a high intensity, like interval-based training, or even working on like repeated sprint efforts,
Hmm.
um, that would go more on a higher intensity day. And
Hmm.
very importantly at the end, because like I said, all of your strength stuff, your speed stuff, fatigue ruins it all. So
Hmm.
get that stuff done and then your interval stuff at the end. And then anything that's going to be more aerobic in nature, throw that on the high volume day because you're going to spend 20, 30 plus minutes at a low to moderate intensity
Hmm.
to get that adaptation for yourself. So just no matter what the kind of training is, just group it in that way. And
Hmm.
small plug on the website, I put together skill training programs for basketball and soccer
There we
that
go.
match this kind of schedule. So, yes, your strength training and your speed training and your conditioning, all that should follow the same kind of schedule. You can also apply
Hmm.
it to the skills development stuff.
Hmm.
So I used examples like with basketball, um, it's important to get a lot of repetition. So
Yeah,
if you're going to shoot hundreds of jump shots on one day of the week, that's a high volume, high repetition activity.
it
Group it
is.
with the other high volume stuff. And then if you're going to work on a lot of really aggressive, like one dribble pull-ups or like, attacking moves to the basket, things like that,
Hmm.
throw it on your high intensity and group these things together so that they're not conflicting with each other.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense. Um, Regarding you brought up the fact that you do not want to train fatigued, which is why you don't necessarily want to place conditioning at the beginning of a session. Is that specifically related to injuries, or is it just depending on which energy system you first want to tap into? I know this is getting more like physiological,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm curious about that.
Well, if with anything that's intense in nature, so again,
Hmm.
strength, speed, plyometrics, these things, fatigue's going to limit your output. So if you're capable of, say, squatting 300 pounds, but you
Right.
just did your conditioning first, and now your max on that moment is 240 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Sure, you can still go in, do your squat. It'll feel just as hard as it felt if you did it fresh on another day, but you're
Hmm.
not getting the same benefit because you're not the actual intensity is not matching like the subjective feel of the intensity because you have this fatigue layered on top of it.
Right.
Same thing, actually, most importantly with speed training
Hmm.
is people will go through their sprints tired, so you're not
Yeah.
moving as fast. So
Yes.
if you're trying to run, like, I mean, I work with GPS data, so I actually see the sprint numbers. I know this might not
Hmm.
be super applicable, but if you're trying to run 35 kilometers an hour,
Right.
uh, and all of your sprint training is done at 32, 33, because you're not resting long enough in between, how do you expect to eventually get faster to that 35 mark? Like
Yeah, it's
you're
gonna be
never touching it.
unrealistic.
Right. So it's all about producing those outputs,
Hmm.
which means fatigue. It can't exist. Yes.
Yeah. I feel like it's kind of like a dangerous slippery slope to walk
Hmm.
on, especially for athletes. Yeah. And I brought up injuries, so this kind of brings us into our next point, um, of instability training. This is something that's a bit controversial because I hear some coaches don't really agree or approve of instability training, or they just don't think it's that efficient. But others actually love adding this component almost as a progression. So I kind of want to hear your opinion on it. What are your thoughts on adding instability to an exercise in your athletes' training sessions? Have you done it? And many say that it's to improve your core, balance, and more. But do you actually believe that it does that? Um, let's hear it.
So I I think this links nicely with the talk of training in extremes because
Hmm.
um, it's very similar because some people will take a strength exercise and do it on a Bosu ball or on an RX pad or on some unstable surface. Um, and the bottom line is a strength exercise stops being a strength exercise when you take the stability away.
Hmm.
You need stability to produce force, and that's just a fact of the matter. And it's almost similar to the fatigue conversation because if you take your strength exercise and you do it on a Bosu ball, you're moving less weight, and the actual thing that you're getting out of it is super unclear. Like, yeah, it feels
Yeah.
hard, but I couldn't tell you what the benefit of that is. So,
Yeah.
um, the way I look at it, it's not that you should never train unstable situations, but it just
Hmm.
that shouldn't be your strength training. Or that
Like
shouldn't
so,
be
so, so you mean that that should be a completely different training?
right. Or like it
Yeah.
could put it on the same day. I don't care, but like not the
Hmm.
same exercise.
Yes. Right.
So usually, uh, if you're gonna do something balance related, just have it as isolated own thing. I'm not necessarily against stuff like RX pads and things like that. It's things that I've
Hmm.
used in moderation, but to be honest with you, I think the best form of training that, if you want to call it balance or stability or whatever,
Hmm.
is just challenging positions on stable surfaces
Yeah.
because you're never going to play your sport on a Bosu ball. You're never going to actually be asked to perform any of these things. Like,
Hmm.
really, what you're trying to do is be strong and immovable
Hmm.
on flat ground. And you just have to
Yes.
get really, really good at that. So usually that just involves doing more complex things on flat ground. And by the way, one of the most
Hmm.
complex things you can do on flat ground is probably just play your sport. So it kind of
Yes. Yeah.
circles
There you
back.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I'm sure you've heard this too. A lot of people sometimes justify instability training specifically with injury prevention. And strength and conditioning, I think as a whole, is very closely related to injury prevention, which is why we train our tendons or ligaments and just our muscles and muscle groups to be stronger. But would you say that instability exercises do prepare an athlete for an in-game situation where they could damage, let's say, their ACL, PCL, MCL? Or do you think that's an untrainable scenario because of aspects like, power and the strength that you're putting in, just like you said, an in-game situation, whereas obviously more high volume, high intensity compared to in a lift session?
Yeah, I think it does contribute because for example, like when you stand on a Bosu ball and you see your ankle kind
Right.
of wobbling back and forth really, really quickly, what's happening is there's this quick neurological feedback loop between the foot and the spinal cord, and it's making very, very, very quick adjustments to the
Hmm.
position of the foot and where it needs to be to keep you upright, keep the ankle from rolling over, things like that. And and enhancing that neurological quality is
Hmm.
a factor when it comes to injuries and things like that. So
That's cool.
it's important. Um, but I think one, you get that stimulus when you play your sport. At least
Absolutely.
you should if you're competing at a high level. Um, and yes, there's a place to supplement with it for sure, similar to
Hmm.
conditioning. But I also think like, okay, if you're dealing with an injury, maybe you're starting with some single leg balance on the ground, and then maybe you're progressing to some single leg balance on an unstable surface. But
Hmm.
at a certain point, like the end goal progression is playing your sport and doing really
Hmm.
complex, high intensity actions in a
Hmm.
sporting situation.
Hmm.
So your like your best injury prevention,
Hmm.
if you're healthy, is just being exposed to some really chaotic environments where you're
Yeah.
reacting
Really
to
awkward
teammates or
motions.
you're hitting other people or hitting the floor. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
these are the things that are uh giving you the qualities to be robust. And yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really good point. And, this reminds me of two different things, actually based on your content. So first of all, I see that you do a lot of content, especially of exploring your ranges of motion.
Hmm.
Um, and now I have a question for you. Do you believe that kind of exploring, I don't know, the ranges of motion that your shoulder is able to do with no weight, literally just exploring it, does that contribute to that neural stimulation that you're talking about of the spinal cord of the ankle?
It's a little different because
Hmm.
that's more, so the funny thing about that is that neurological connection is actually
Yeah.
cut off from the brain. Like the
Hmm.
signal is being picked up by the foot, going to the spinal cord. About it's similar to like you touch a hot stove and it's not your brain thinking,
Yeah.
oh, this is hot, pull your hand away. It's an automatic response. And
Yes. Yes.
that proprioception balance is very similar.
Right.
Um, the more of that kind of like end range exploration,
Hmm.
what's going on there is you have, at least in most people with most of their joints, have ranges that they could be pushed into. Like if,
Right.
someone grabbed your foot and stretched your hamstring, the leg's going to go further, most likely, than if you lifted your leg yourself.
Yes.
Meaning there's some degrees of motion that the joint can get to, but that your muscles can't get you into on their own.
Yes.
Which means you have some degrees of no control.
Hmm.
So relating this to the injury prevention conversation, if you are exploring those ranges and you're doing active movements towards your end ranges and closing that gap towards
Hmm.
now, you can actually actively move through most of the range that's available to you. What that
Hmm.
means is if you take the ankle, for example,
Hmm.
um, if you're strong and have good connection to like really weird ankle positions, if
Hmm.
your ankle rolls over, you're probably just snapping back out of it and like walking it off.
Yeah.
As opposed to someone who's never let their ankle go sideways in a controlled environment and then they end up on the side of their foot and then like the ligaments are done
Hmm.
and it's
And you're done.
yes, and it's a messy situation. So
Yeah.
um it kind of just feels logical to say like basketball players get ankle injuries all the time. If you can get strong in like an ankle bent to the side position, to use simple terms, that probably means you're going to be more resilient if you roll over on that ankle.
Yes.
And yeah, the proprioception stuff, the balance stuff might might help prevent you going over on that ankle. But then in the inevitable situation where it goes or you step on someone's foot, like
Yeah.
something uncontrollable, what is the nature of those tissues to be able to handle that position?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's a really cool point, and I think that's a really big point, especially that's brought up with instability exercises. The fact that you're able to bring a specific muscle or tendon or ligament in a very awkward situation, and then you're able to still pull some weight and make it stronger.
Mhm.
But something else that this reminded me of is your gadget that you actually created,
Oh, yes.
that remind me about it. So you ended up using it on an athlete that had an ankle injury.
Yeah, actually, I'll give a shout out to Daniel
Hmm.
Crutzen, who was one of our players. I have this right here actually. Played
Hmm.
at Forge, and won some championships and all that stuff. And I wish I had one next to me. I created these. It's funny
We'll input a
because
picture.
I'll hold this up in a second. So I had seen if you're curious about this stuff, you can look it up for laughs. But it was something I think in the Goda world of training that they were using these like discs. It was like a disc on like a ball, and they were using it to like create like a torque through the leg. They were doing some like rotational stuff with it, which was whatever. I saw it and thought it would work really, really well as a way to like overload the ankle if you used it in a different way. So I went to a craft store and I bought wooden discs and wooden like domes, like
Hmm.
half circles, and I glued them together and I put skateboard grip tape on top. And we were
Yeah.
using them at Forge to invert and evert the ankle and rock side to side to train the muscles on the inside outside of the ankle in these weird long positions.
Hmm.
And Crutzen was like enamored by this thing and started brainstorming all these other ideas. And I know on the audio, you won't be able to see this, but came up with packaging and all the rest for this, which is basically like it's like lacrosse ball material, but it's a dome, like a half circle
Hmm.
shape. So it makes that motion side to side a lot more smooth. You can go a lot further. Um, and it's funny because like if you've never used it before, you got to start like really small, but then
Yeah.
once you get comfortable with it, you can really go into some like extreme positions. And it's something that the team in some respect have been using for the last 2.5, 3 years. Um, and we have all the packaging and everything set up. I've got a bunch of samples in the
Hmm.
attic. Um, and we haven't launched them yet. It's been too long. I'm gonna reach out to him.
It's
We're gonna talk about this. But
it has been too long.
it's been something that's been on the back burner for a long time. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's been how I've been solving the ankle training issue. Because by the way,
Hmm.
if you go to like physio for an ankle injury, what are they gonna do? You're
Yeah.
gonna do like your ABCs, so your
Yep.
passive ankle movement,
Dorsey.
which
Yeah.
which is a great first step. Totally
Absolutely.
fine with that. Then you're gonna
Hmm.
get into your mini band exercises. And then maybe that progresses into something like instability, like something on a Bosu ball or something like that.
Exactly.
But how do you how do you overload that? Like
Yes.
if you're
Yeah,
training
exactly.
any other muscle in the body, you don't go from unloaded to lightly loaded to forgetting about it.
You have to keep
You
progressing.
actually you keep progressing. So there's these certain joints and certain muscles that we just don't follow that same logic with.
It's
So
interesting. It's like we forget about them.
yes, so this was my attempt to solve that problem for the ankle, and it's done a decent job so far. So
Yeah, exactly. It's making an impact that forge. So
yes,
there you go. Yeah. Well, that I think ends our conversation for the day. Thank you, Jacob, for a very controversial but also very real conversation about different training methods.
thank you.
Guys, make sure to stick around for the next episode. If you guys have any questions, please reach out to Jacob. If you have any questions that you want us to talk about, any topics, we'll be more than happy to cover them. And if any viewers are going to be watching the Super Bowl, I guess we'll hear from you guys later.
All right, see you
See you
next week.
guys. Bye.